Nikko Allen Jenkins has spent 8 years on death row, awaiting the end that he once begged for, but now haunts him. In a frenzy of violence just weeks after prison release, he blasted a young mother's face and neck with a shotgun blast at close range, leaving her body crumpled on a dark road as her SUV idled nearby with her 3 terrified children inside. But to understand how a boy from the shadows became this monster, we need to go back to where it all began. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from as we dive into this chilling story. Nikko Allen Jenkins was born on September 16, 1986 in Colorado, but his family soon moved to the tough streets of North Omaha, Nebraska, a place where poverty gripped tight and hope felt like a stranger. His parents, David A. McGee and Lori Jenkins, came from the Levering family, once respected Omaha tribe leaders who fought for Native American land rights in Washington, D.C. But by Nikko's time, that legacy had crumbled into a storm of addiction, abuse, and crime. His great-great-grandfather, Levi Levering, had been a trailblazer, but generations later, relatives racked up over 600 convictions for everything from theft to violence. Nikko's dad, David, bounced in and out of jail for threats and assaults, while his mom, Lori, battled her own demons, including drugs and a rocky, violent relationship with David that left young Nikko watching fights that shook the house. Money was always short. The family scraped by in a rundown neighborhood where gangs ruled the corners, and kids learned survival the hard way. It was a world of neglect where booze and crack tore families apart, and child welfare systems meant to help often just added more pain, especially for Native families like theirs hit hard by biased policies and lost resources. From the start, Nikko's childhood screamed trouble. At just 7 years old, he snuck his mom's loaded .25 caliber handgun to Highland Elementary School. A loaded secret that got him hauled away by cops and marked him as a kid, already too deep in the darkness. Imagine a first grader, eyes wide but hands steady, hiding a weapon among crayons and lunchboxes. What kind of home pushes a child that young toward danger? By age 8, self-harm crept in. His mom had him hospitalized for cutting himself and wild mood swings, signs of deeper wounds from the chaos around him. Doctors spotted early mental health red flags, ADHD, maybe more, but the family was too broken to hold it together. Nikko bounced into foster care and group homes, but violence followed like a shadow. At 11, he got kicked out of a group home for nonstop fights, his fists flying in rage that no one seemed to tame. School, it slipped away fast. By 7th grade, he was expelled after more scraps and skipped classes altogether, trading books for street corners where petty theft and gang whispers waited. But what happened next when he turned 15 and grabbed a knife in his first real assault? On a warm July night in 2001, 15-year-old Jenkins crossed a line that would define his future. He and 2 accomplices targeted a lone driver in Omaha, pulling a knife and demanding the man's car and wallet. The victim, caught off guard, handed over his keys, but Jenkins didn't stop there. He slashed at the man, leaving him shaken but alive. The trio sped off in the stolen car, but police caught them hours later. Jenkins, barely old enough to drive, was charged with robbery and assault. His age didn't spare him. The court saw a kid already hardened by the streets, and he was convicted as a juvenile, but faced serious consequences. This wasn't just a teenage mistake. It was a glimpse of the violence he'd unleash later. Sent to a juvenile detention facility, Jenkins didn't reform. He fought guards and other kids, his rage growing like a storm. But what happened next would push him deeper into the system. By 2003, at age 16, Jenkins was out of juvenile detention, but far from reformed. He dropped out of school surrounded by a family with over 600 convictions among them, including his mother, Lori, and father, David, both tangled in drugs and violence. That year, Jenkins upped the stakes. He and a group of accomplices, including family members, targeted a convenience store in North Omaha. Armed with a handgun, Jenkins stormed in, barking orders at the terrified clerk, who handed over cash and cigarettes. The robbery was quick but sloppy. Security cameras caught his face, and police arrested him days later. Charged with armed robbery, Jenkins faced adult court this time. His defense argued his youth and troubled home life, but the judge saw a pattern. a teen with no remorse, already comfortable with a gun in his hand. Jenkins was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, a term that would stretch from 2003 to 2013, primarily at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. At 16, he was locked away, but what happened inside those prison walls would shape a killer. Jenkins's decade in prison wasn't a time of redemption. It was a crucible that forged his descent into chaos. Sent to the Nebraska State Penitentiary, he faced a harsh environment, but his own actions made it worse. From the start, he was a problem inmate, racking up over 100 disciplinary infractions for fighting, threatening guards, and destroying property. His behavior landed him in solitary confinement for extended periods, sometimes years, where he was locked in a small cell for 23 hours a day with minimal human contact. Solitary broke many inmates, but for Jenkins, it seemed to fracture something deeper. He later claimed he began hearing voices in prison, specifically from Apophis, an Egyptian serpent god he believed demanded human sacrifices. Was this a genuine mental break or a calculated act? The truth remains murky, but records show he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and personality disorders, though treatment was spotty at best. Jenkins's mental health pleas were ignored or mishandled by the prison system. He wrote letters to officials, begging for psychiatric help, claiming he was going crazy and feared what he'd do upon release. In 2013, he told a prison psychiatrist he'd kill if let out, but his warnings were dismissed as manipulation. The Nebraska Department of Corrections later faced scrutiny for releasing him without a mandatory mental health evaluation, despite his history and clear signs of instability. In solitary, Jenkins also tattooed his face and body with cryptic symbols, including snakes and hieroglyphs, claiming they were tributes to Apophis. He emerged from prison on July 30th, 2013, not rehabilitated but radicalized, his mind a tangle of paranoia, delusions, and a thirst for violence. What would happen when this ticking bomb stepped back into the world? It started on August 11th, 2013, on a muggy summer night when Jenkins, then 26, set his plan in motion. Just 12 days out of prison, he wasn't adjusting to freedom, he was hunting. Around 3 a.m., Jenkins, with his sister Erica Jenkins and cousin Christine Bordeaux, lured two men, Jorge Cajiga-Ruiz, 29, and Juan Uribe-Pena, 26, to Spring Lake Park in South Omaha, under the pretense of a sexual encounter arranged by Bordeaux. The park, a quiet wooded area, was perfect for their trap. Dark, secluded, and far from prying eyes. Cajiga-Ruiz and Uribe-Pena, both hard-working immigrants who frequented local bars, had no idea they were walking into a robbery that would turn deadly. Jenkins ambushed them with a 12-gauge shotgun, the weapon's weight heavy in his hands but his intent heavier. He ordered the men to the ground, robbing them of their cash and belongings. But this wasn't just about money. As Cajiga-Ruiz and Uribe-Pena lay helpless, Jenkins fired, the shotgun's roar echoing through the night. He shot both men in the head at close range, their bodies collapsing in the dirt, blood pooling beneath them. The brutality was cold, calculated, two lives snuffed out in moments, leaving families to wonder why their loved ones never came home. Cajiga-Ruiz's sister later spoke of the agony of losing her brother, a man who worked tirelessly to support his family, now reduced to a memory stolen by a stranger's rage. Jenkins, unmoved, fled the scene with Erica and Christine. But this was only the beginning. 8 days later, Jenkins struck again, this time targeting someone he knew. Curtis Bradford, 22, was a fellow ex-con Jenkins had met in prison, a young man trying to rebuild his life after incarceration. On August 18th, Jenkins and Bradford met up, even snapping a photo together with Jenkins' cousin, Ahab Bordeaux, showing off guns like trophies. Jenkins later claimed he believed Bradford was a threat, someone who might snitch or cross him, though evidence suggests it was another robbery gone murderous. Around 1:30 a.m. on August 19th, Jenkins lured Bradford to a house near 18th and Clark Streets, a gritty North Omaha neighborhood. In the early morning darkness, Jenkins pulled the same 12-gauge shotgun. As Bradford stood unsuspecting, Jenkins fired, the blast tearing into Bradford's head and chest. His body crumpled to the ground outside the house, left in a pool of blood under the streetlights. The scene was haunting. Bradford's family later described him as a son and brother who, despite his past, had dreams of a fresh start, now stolen in a betrayal by someone he'd trusted. Jenkins didn't linger. He slipped away, leaving Bradford's body for a passerby to find, the weight of another life taken barely slowing him down. But his bloodlust wasn't satisfied yet. The final and most heart-wrenching crime came just 2 days later. Andrea Kruger, a 33-year-old mother of three, was a bartender at Deja Vu Lounge in northwest Omaha, known for her warm smile and dedication to her kids. On August 21st, around 2 a.m., she was driving home in her white 2012 Chevrolet Traverse after a long shift. Jenkins, now joined by his sister Erica, cousin Christine, and another accomplice, Anthony Wells, spotted her SUV at a stoplight near 168th Street and Fort Street, a quiet suburban area. They targeted her for her vehicle, but what followed was pure horror. Jenkins and his crew forced Kruger to pull over, likely with a false story or threat. In a flash, Jenkins dragged her from her SUV, her cries muffled by the late-night silence. He raised his shotgun and fired at close range, the blast shredding her face and neck, leaving her lifeless on the pavement. Her three children, waiting at home for their mom, would never see her again. Her husband, Michael Ryan Kruger, later spoke of the unbearable void left by her death, their kids' lives forever scarred by a senseless act. The crime scene was a nightmare. Kruger's body abandoned on the road, her SUV stolen, and her family's world shattered. Jenkins and his accomplices sped off in her vehicle, leaving her like she was nothing. After his deadly rampage in August 2013, Nikko Jenkins didn't vanish into the night. He stayed right there in Omaha, crashing with family and acting like the killings were just another Tuesday. But the police were closing in fast, piecing together clues that would trap him like a noose tightening. By late August, the city was buzzing with fear, and tips started pouring in from folks who knew Jenkins' face from his prison days or spotted him bragging in the neighborhood. On August 29, 2013, cops finally moved in, but not for the murders. At first, it was for a separate charge of making terroristic threats. They raided a house near 108 in West Maple Roads, where Jenkins was holed up, and what they found there would seal his fate forever. The raid was swift and tense. Officers burst in with a search warrant, guns drawn, and there was Jenkins, caught off guard, but mouthy as ever. They hauled him out in handcuffs, but the real jackpot was what they uncovered inside. A 12-gauge shotgun, still reeking of gunpowder, that ballistics experts later matched to the murders of Jorge Cajiga-Ruiz, Juan Uribe-Pena, Curtis Bradford, and Andrea Kruger. It was the same weapon that had blasted away 4 lives in just 10 days. Surveillance footage from a local gun shop sealed the deal. A woman linked to Jenkins' family had bought Brennecke Classic Magnum 12-gauge deer slugs, the exact ammo used in the killings, just days before the spree started. Cameras along the route where Kruger's stolen SUV was ditched showed Jenkins and his crew dumping it like trash, trying to cover their tracks, but leaving a digital trail a mile wide. Jenkins' family wasn't far behind. His sister Erica, cousin Christine Bordeaux, mother Lori, and Uncle Warren Levering got swept up in the arrest too, all tied to the murders through witness tips and phone records showing they helped lure victims or clean up after. One tipster even overheard Jenkins boasting about the sacrifices to his serpent god, Apophis. But the real breaker? On September 3, 2013, during an 8-hour interrogation, Jenkins cracked. He spilled it all in a wild, rambling confession, admitting to the 4 murders and claiming Apophis commanded him to kill for chaos and power. "I did it for the kingdom," he ranted, describing every shot like it was a ritual. Nikko Jenkins didn't bother with a traditional alibi. He never denied pulling the trigger. Instead, his defense was a bizarre mix of supernatural claims and blame shifting, insisting that demons from the Egyptian serpent god Apophis forced his hand, not his own free will. In letters to the court and media right after his confession, he called the killings sacrifices to protect Apophis's realm with animalistic, savage brutality, and begged to plead guilty immediately, as if owning it would somehow shield him from the truth. He even sued the state for $24.5 million, arguing prison officials ignored his pleas for mental help during his 10-year stint, leaving him broken and responsible for the spree. But prosecutors saw through it fast. His detailed confession, the matching shotgun, family testimonies, and surveillance footage painted a picture of cold, calculated murders, not divine possession. Experts diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and ruled he was faking the psychosis to dodge blame, scoring a 68 on an IQ test that showed he knew exactly what he was doing. The alibi crumbled under psych evaluations. Doctors like Y. Scott Moore said Jenkins was competent, just manipulative, hearing no real voices, but inventing them to explain his rage. By the time trial rolled around, his God talk was just courtroom theater, disproven by the hard evidence of bullets and blood. The trial kicked off in April 2014 in Douglas County District Court, a spectacle that had Omaha on edge. Jenkins, allowed to represent himself with advisory attorneys, turned it into chaos from day one, howling like a wolf, speaking in fake tongues, and cackling as prosecutors replayed the gruesome details of each killing. "Apophis demands blood," he'd shout, his face tattoos of snakes and hieroglyphs twisting with every outburst. But Judge Peter Battalion kept it moving, holding multiple competency hearings where shrinks debated if Jenkins was truly nuts or just plain crazy. One doctor called his symptoms fabricated, pointing to how he'd malingered since childhood to avoid trouble. Key moments: Jenkins owned no contest pleas to all 4 murders, waiving a jury trial because he understood the charges, though his rants made everyone question it. Then came the evidence parade, ballistics linking the shotgun, phone pings placing him at every scene, and family flippers like his cousin Christine, who spilled how they lured victims for easy cash that always ended in blasts. Victims' families sat stone-faced, Andrea Kruger's husband gripping photos of his kids as Jenkins laughed off her final screams. Delays piled up, sentencing pushed from August 2014 after more psych stays at Lincoln Regional Center, where docs finally cleared him despite his self-mutilations and suicide bids. On April 16, 2014, Battalion dropped the hammer, guilty on all 4 first-degree murders, plus weapons charges, after accepting the pleas and finding overwhelming proof. No jury needed, Jenkins waived it, but the judge saw through the antics. The real nail-biter was sentencing, dragged out for years with appeals over his mental fitness. Finally, on May 30, 2017, a 3-judge panel, Battalion plus 2 others, delivered the verdict: death 4 times over, plus 450 to 500 years tacked on for the guns. "One of the worst killing sprees in state history," Battalion boomed, weighing his violent past and lack of remorse against shaky mental claims. Families wept in relief, but Jenkins? He just grinned, muttering about Apophis again. With appeals still bouncing around, including to the U.S. Supreme Court that shot it down in 2020, the end feels close. But for a man who cheated death so long, will the needle ever drop? Nikko Allen Jenkins' life on death row at Tecumseh State Correctional Institution in Nebraska has been a grim echo of the chaos that defined his freedom. A slow grind of isolation, mental torment, and erratic outbursts that keep everyone on edge. Sentenced to death in May 2017 for the brutal murders of 4 innocent people, Jenkins has spent the past 8 years locked in a single cell, part of a wing housing Nebraska's 11 death row inmates, where the air hangs heavy with tension and the walls close in like forgotten promises. The prison environment is stark. Concrete floors, steel doors that clang shut for 23 hours a day, and a routine of meager meals slid through a slot, with just an hour for exercise in a fenced cage under watchful eyes. Guards patrol in pairs, always alert, because Jenkins has made death row feel like a threat even inside. His behavior? A wild mix of defiance and despair. He's racked up infractions for yelling threats, banging on doors until his fists bleed, and once even sharpening tiles from the wall into makeshift blades for self-harm. Interactions with guards are explosive. He's screamed at them about his serpent god Apophis, demanding they bow or face curses, turning simple checks into standoffs that end with him in restraints. Other inmates? He keeps his distance, muttering to himself in the yard. But rumors swirl of him trying to recruit them into his delusions, whispering about rituals that make even hardened cons uneasy. What drives a man to turn his cell into a battlefield, even when the real war is already lost? Jenkins' days blur into a haze of forced medication and fractured thoughts. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar since childhood, he's been involuntarily dosed with psychotropic drugs 4 times in the last 2 years alone. A panel of experts voting unanimously to pump him full of antipsychotics to keep his mind from unraveling completely. He spends hours scratching new tattoos onto his skin, snakes, symbols, and now words like dawn, or staring at the ceiling, claiming visions from Apophis that command chaos. Reading? Rarely, mostly twisted texts on ancient myths that feed his obsessions. Writing letters? Oh, he floods the courts with them, ranting about his kingdom or suing the state for millions over his pre-spree prison neglect. Remorse? It's nowhere to be found. During sentencing, he laughed as families wept. On death row, he's bragged in interviews about the sacrifices, showing no flicker of regret for the lives he stole. Jorge's immigrant dreams, Juan's quiet nights, Curtis's second chance, Andrea's children's tears. Religion? His twisted faith in Apophis deepened, not some redemptive light, but a dark anchor that justifies the blood. Appeals? He's flip-flopped like a shadow in the wind, fighting tooth and nail through the Nebraska Supreme Court in 2019, which upheld his sentence, then the U.S. Supreme Court denial in 2020, claiming solitary confinement broke him. But in March 2025, he penned a desperate note begging to drop everything and die, only to backtrack in April, nodding off in court as his lawyer pushed for more evaluations. Now in September 2025, his team argues he's intellectually disabled, IQ tests hovering around 68, making execution unconstitutional, a last-ditch plea that could rewrite his fate. 19 suicide attempts punctuate it all, slashing his throat in 2018, eyes and neck in 2019. Double digits by now, each one a cry from the void, pulling him to the medical ward where doctors stitch him up, only for the cycle to restart. In this endless wait, the weight presses down. A man whose crimes scarred Omaha forever, now trapped in a cell that mirrors the isolation he once warned against. But will his latest claim of disability finally halt the clock? Or is it just another twist in a tale too dark to end? Hearings are set, but Nebraska's bigger hurdle? No executions since 2018, thanks to lethal injection drug shortages. Pharma companies refuse to supply, turning death row into a de facto life sentence. With 11 men waiting, Jenkins isn't first in line, and his mental flips keep stalling everything. As of September 8, 2025, no dates set, no gurney prepped. The process crawls, a limbo that punishes without ending. But if his disability claim sticks, will it spare him the needle he's both begged for and battled against? In the shadow of 4 stolen lives, Nikko Jenkins' saga raises haunting questions. Has justice truly been served in this endless wait? Or does it expose the cracks in a system that breaks minds before it claims them? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.